Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, the show where I, Ben Talon, illustrator and writer, explore human creativity and invite people from the creative industry and far beyond to share their story of creativity, both the nature and the nurture, the chaos and the calm. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, a vital ingredient in the solutions to all of our problems, but so often misunderstood. Little by little, I'm building an archive of valuable stories, experiences, and tips to help you maximise yours. The show is supported by founding sponsor and B Corp, Illustration X. Take a look at their stunning range of illustrators and animators now at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, it's by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to on Spotify and all good music streaming services. Today I am joined by multi-disciplinary artist and designer Sarah Boris. Sarah has been working independently as an artist and designer since 2015 in her own studio practice, but before then she worked at the Barbican in London, Phaidon, a major book publisher, and many other projects independently. We're going to get into what that trajectory looks like, her roots, her current creativity, and how she manages her own independent practice, staying afloat financially, staying inspired creatively, and producing that beautiful activist work. Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Ben Talon. I am your host. This is The Creative Condition, episode 208. 208. When did that happen? You wouldn't think so with the listenership. I'm joking. No, this is a joking aside. This is a big year for the show. It's make or break in a lot of ways, because this is the year that the book, The Creative Condition, is going to come out March 28th. It's being published by my own label, Wrong & Press. I'm very proud of it as a body of work. And finally, I have some brand consistency, some visual identity across the show, some direction, and a real sense of what the creative condition means to me, what it looks like. So it is about time that I worked on those listeners. It's a decent little listenership. It's a very dedicated and passionate one, which I'm eternally grateful for, but it deserves more. Because when you've got people like Sarah Boris on the show, routinely, inspiring people, you sort of have to match that up. But it does take time. It does take patience. Like anything, there's a lot of competition out there, in the podcast world now. So it is a real mission this year. I want to see a real significant jump. I'm going to drive it. I already have been doing. You might have heard from me on messages on LinkedIn and Instagram. I'm getting out there. I'm banging the drum. I'm going to make this show what it deserves to be, which is going to be a real outpost of elevating creativity. And helping people to understand and embrace it, which is exactly what the Creative Condition book is. So there you have it. That's my little mission statement for the top of the show. I hope you're well. I hope things are good for you. I hope you are staying sane and happy in the face of all those 24-hour news cycles and the things we have to manage in today's world. Big thank you to the founding supporter and ongoing sponsor of the show, Illustration X. You can check out their global range of illustration and animation portfolios right now at illustrationx.com. I am also looking out for more sponsors, more partners for the show. So get in touch. If you've got a brand, if you've got an agency that will benefit from being a part of the Creative Condition, it's all pure. No one's steering the content other than me. So it's kind of anything goes. I like to think that this show is a little bit fruity at times. We're getting some deep topics. We can cover whatever. So get in touch, say hello. I'd love to partner up with relevant brands and agencies and people who are also trying to champion the cause of creativity and artistic expression in our societies. Sarah Boris coming up today. Really excited about this. So quickly, actually, before I move on to Sarah, did you enjoy the creative checklist? I loved putting that together. That was fun. I enjoy the list-based episodes, as I mentioned. Tremendous feedback, by the way. Thank you for that. And contrary to what I said at the top of the show, the numbers have been going up this year. Been a big improvement. I'm really happy about that. And I think it's starting to show now. Gone weekly, consistent release time, 5 a.m. every Wednesday GMT. Consistent look across book and podcast. It's all starting to marry up. It's all starting to make sense. I'm getting there, people. And thank you for the reviews. There's been an increase in that too. That really helps. Also, if you haven't done it already, please take the time to go and give me a little, hopefully a 5-star rating. You might not think so. 4 stars, fine. Reviews are also welcome. Subscriptions, share with a friend. It really helps. Where was I? Yes, the tips episode. So part 2 is going to be coming up. I walked into a very pleasantly busy January in terms of my freelance illustration career, so I apologise that it's not part 2 this week. But it means that you're getting Sarah Boris ahead of time. Sarah's awesome. She's really cool. I met her at Off Festival. We were aware of each other through social media. We were, you know how it goes. We all know each other in the industry, don't we, through our social platforms. But I met her properly at Off Festival, where she was also speaking last year at the 2023 festival in Barcelona. And her talk was bloody brilliant. Honestly, it was... that alone left me with a spring in my step coming away from that festival, not to mention all the other ones that I saw. But she was a real standout. And what was lovely, and we do touch upon it in this episode, is I bumped into her. We'd been chatting loads prior to it because we had a lot of overlapping mutual friends who were also at our festival. So there was a lot of beers flowing about, and we all saw each other at the hotel where the speakers were staying. And I bumped into Sarah on the way to her talk, and the poor lass was a bag of nerves on the way there, and she was carrying her prints that she was giving away afterwards, and she gave me one which was really lovely. And lo and behold, she got on that stage, and because I knew that she was a little bit nervous, I did pick up on a few early notes of nervousness in her voice, but you wouldn't have known it unless you knew it, and that quickly petered out, and she just gave an astounding, inspiring talk about her art studio, her art and design studio. So I'm going to read you the bio because it tells you better than what I can tell you about the practice. But let me just say, she just reminded me of all the things that I love about this industry. So Sarah Boris is a multi-disciplinary artist and designer. In 2015, she set up her eponymous art and design studio. Her work has since been exhibited at the Design Museum, London, and acquired by the, sorry for this bad pronunciation, Stedelijk Museum, Amsterdam, FRAC Normandy, Rouen, the New York Centre of Book Arts, and MAK Vienna. Her books include Global Warming Anyone, Le Theatre Graphique, and Rainbow. Did you like that French there from a Yorkshireman, by the way? Her recent public art commission, the Heart Bench series created in 2021, demonstrates how she deploys a universal symbol into a functional sculpture. Prior to setting up her studio between 2005 and 2015, Sarah worked for some of the UK's leading cultural and publishing institutions, including Phaidon, the Institute of Contemporary Arts, and Barbican. She was judge president for DNAD and has judged awards internationally. She has lectured at UK and European universities and spoken in festivals around the world such as Off Barcelona, Off Sevilla, All Flows Milton Keynes, Type Now 23 Paris, Graphic Design Festival Breda, St Bride's Foundation London. For 2024, she is preparing 2 solo exhibitions and her modular artworks and a new book on language. She is an absolute dynamo. I love people like this. She reminds me very much of Kerry Lemon, who I mentioned in this conversation. If you didn't hear the episode with Kerry Lemon, I think it's episode 46. Wow, I mean, my word, she's one of my bigger inspirations in her approach to winning work as a creative professional. But that is enough for me. I think that gives you a taste of what's coming up. We're going to cover a lot of things, including Sarah's background, which she's never previously talked about. Very exciting. Great to get that one. So thank you for all the recent support. Like I say, things are on the up. I want to keep raising my listenership, so please do support by reviewing and subscribing, but just telling people and getting it out there and sharing the episodes. And if you like something about a show, do come and tell me. If you don't like something, that's fine too. You can come and tell me. You can DM me, you can tweet me or whatever publicly on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the best place to get me these days, actually, followed by Instagram, or hello@bentalon.com if you want to be in touch. So there you have it. Here is my conversation with the lovely, brilliant, inspiring, talented Sarah Boris.
Well, so I have 2 sisters, and none of them are working in the creative field. One is a master's, but she also looks after children, and the other one works in communication, and she used to live in Kiev, So I guess we're all living in different countries, which is interesting. And I grew up, actually, I was born in London, and then I was in kindergarten in the US until I was 6 years old. And then my parents moved back to France. They're both French. And I grew up in France until I moved to the UK. And so I guess what's interesting for me with that is that so my mother tongue is French. I guess you can tell from the accent, which I can't get rid of. And my memory is mainly visual. It's not like auditive. Um, but it meant that for me, there's not one place that I would call home. And although so and my I I have multiple nationalities, so it also sort of blurred the sense of identity, which I can carry and which probably also makes me has made me look at things quite differently in terms of, freedom of movement, which I find super important, and the notion of borders and even the idea of nationality, which I find obsolete. The only nationality we need is human.
Hmm.
So,
Yep.
so I
I think
think
I think the world will be in a better place if we took that approach.
yeah, and so yeah, so it was quite, and I think obviously the kindergarten in the US, um, it's like I have fun memories of that because it's really heavy on the arts and crafts over there. Obviously, I can't compare it with another country because I wasn't in kindergarten in another country, but I think that made me really fond of like working with paint and lots of materials and glitter.
Mm.
And for some time, we were living across a candy shop.
Ah.
And well, I like candy. Um, Obviously less than before, but I still have a sweet tooth. And but it just meant that I would go to the candy shop. I could escape and run across the street and go into this. And it really, like in my memory, it really felt like this little Hans and Gretel house with loads of candy on it. And the woman running it, Ada, was really old. Well, she seemed really old to me at the time, but I was only like 5 or 6. And I would just go in there and spend hours looking at all the candy wrappers. And until now, I didn't realize maybe that's had a huge impact on like how colorful my work is, maybe at the moment, or I think all these things like seep back into the work at some stages of our lives. So I think there's a bit of a pop art sense as well, which has come maybe from this very like bright, very imaginative rappers. Um, so yeah, and then obviously there's the language thing where you start learning words and how to identify words in English, but you're speaking in another language at home.
Mm.
Um, and then moving back to France, it was quite tricky the first years because I didn't integrate so well in the school because you're an outsider when you arrive and everyone's been in kindergarten together. And then you arrive when everyone's already started learning to read in another language. So I think that's always made me quite curious about language and about these two languages I speak. And that I feel I'm always constantly still discovering and trying to master in one way or another, whether it's visual or linguistically or literally or
There's two things I want to pick up on there that we found really interesting. One, the sweet shop is beautiful. I love that, and I'm a big believer in that, in the kind of absorption of our early environments. This is why I always ask about childhood because I just find it. I haven't ever interviewed a guest where there hasn't been a thread that I've noticed from those the answers to those questions. And I had one guest on called Kingsley Nabetchi, who's a brilliant artist, and he grew up in Italy, and he moved to London when he was 13, I think, and his dad was an architect. Um, and there's this duality, there's this thing. So the architecture kind of the patterns and the styles and the line work within the architecture very much comes into Kingsley's drawing style now. And also, he said his mum would do these very elaborate phone doodles and then just throw them away, and he'd keep them. And again, they kind of re-emerge as these tribal patterns in some of the
oh
character
wow.
work that he does now. And I love those stories. I think they're incredible because it's not even a conscious decision. I think it's something that's in there, and you absorb it, and it returns. And that's ultimately creativity. There's a big part of it that comes around that way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, also what I think is interesting is it takes a long time to identify those things. Like it's part of a long process in the journey. And you don't necessarily, like, for example, this thing with, like the pop art side and the language and all that is really like clarified itself in my work in the last couple of years, as opposed to being immediate in my work. And I think also that's part of each one's trajectory, but I feel like I'm still finding my visual language and identity,
Hmm.
whereas some people it's much more immediate. Yeah,
And I think to respond to that, I think that sometimes I think it's beneficial not to consciously become aware of that. That that's a whole debate we could have, but I think that sometimes it's beautiful that it just emerges and it comes very instinctively, whereas
yeah,
almost to become aware sometimes might stultify that process. And you're absolutely right. We're all on these different timelines and we don't really have control over that. It's our life experience. Certain things down the road will activate something that was always there.
yeah,
And the other thing I wanted to ask, so that whole idea of going to a new school and it's it fascinates me and that kind of early change in life. Did that give you any kind of resilience? Was has that did that bring you any kind of strength from having to kind of reacclimatize?
yeah. It's not something I talk a lot about, but I was really bullied when the first year I came back, and I had these big glasses, which is not something I usually mention either. I don't show any photos in talks. I could maybe next year. I feel like I should bring in some new stuff in the talks, but it's I think that makes you definitely resilient in some form. Again, like it's hard to really explain how, but I think it happens actually also to a lot of kids, sadly. And actually, I changed schools after a year. Um, so so I think that yeah, that definitely builds a sense of like, how to, I wouldn't say defend yourself because I wasn't some kind of like, you
Yeah.
know, very strong kid, like,
Mm.
but I think it's yeah, it's I think also we minimize how we can shape someone. Um, so I wouldn't say like I carry trauma, but I think it has maybe made me a little bit sometimes introverted in some social situations.
Hmm.
I'm not like a natural like extrovert. I can be sociable, but I can also be quite introverted. And I think maybe that also contributed to that aspect. And I think maybe also that sort of pushed me even more in sort of the visual field where, like my comfort zone was making work and painting and, like doing things just in a sort of natural sort of escapism way.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? No, it's never good to go through that kind of experience. But like any adversity in life, there are sometimes silver linings. There are things that we take from that we might not ever realize at the time, inner strength or resilience. And even just that kind of process of entering new environments and changing and adapting to things. I think that
Yeah,
a small measure of that, I don't know if change is the right word, but in our lives, that kind of adversity it does create a kind of a work ethic almost. I think
yeah,
I don't know if I have it right because I'm only observing you and your work from the outside looking in, and I don't know you particularly well, but you give off a strength. There's an aura within you and your work and your practice and your brand that I find very admirable and inspiring actually. Um, and so I can't possibly know the roots of that, but I just find these early experiences really interesting and think that they certainly play a part.
yeah, yeah, I think you're right. And
Yeah.
it's the first time I talk about it, so it feels like this podcast session is going to be very therapeutical.
I love these kind of chats. It's just, I mean, I was actually just, in for the listener, like, so we had a time slot and it changed for this podcast. But in that time slot, I was planning for another episode and I was writing about are you aware of the shadow self, the concept of the shadow?
I know
So it's kind of
yeah.
it's being at one with the dark parts of ourselves, or the parts
Oh yeah, okay.
that we might hide. So maybe I'm thinking now
Embracing them.
you with the glasses, yeah.
Me with the glasses. Wait, glasses with tape on them.
Really, wow, yeah.
Yeah, it was really like, you know.
But there's I came across it watching the documentary Stutz, which is by Jonah Hill. It's about his psychotherapist, and they talk about the shadow self, and Jonah talks about being quite an erratic, broken character in his early acting career, and how it took time to be at one with his kind of teenage, very overweight self, and how he was very ashamed of that version of himself. And part of this process that he had with his therapist was to kind of to welcome that former version of himself into his life now and be more proud of that and embrace that as a kind of healing process. I just found it very interesting, and so it got me. He physically brought out a cardboard cutout of that version of himself,
That's
and so it
amazing.
got me thinking about, well, which version of myself might I hide away now or be a bit? And to be honest, there isn't really any version. I've been quite fortunate in having a lot of friends who've enabled me to be very open and very, happy with all the flaws. But it would certainly be the kind of flame shirt wearing, earring wearing 17-year-old self, I think. But
I want to see the flame shirt.
I'll see if I can find a picture. Actually, I've got a really good one from a Paris college trip when I was 17. It's shocking.
That's so cool. Oh yeah, I want to see that.
So in terms of your artistry, like was this something in the family? Was it encouraged, supported?
Um, so that's another good question. So actually, it was quite divisive. I think my mother really encouraged me to pursue that path, and I think my father was a little bit more skeptical because he didn't really see how I would be making a living from it. But I think that's definitely one thing is that I was quite stubborn, and I really wanted to go and study art. And I guess also I'm quite lucky because I did a foundation and a BA in France. And lucky in the sense that the education system over there is, quite different. And you don't have the fees that you might encounter in places like the UK or the US. And I think it's very, it's a huge privilege to be able to be in that kind of education format. And so one thing that happened is that I applied to those schools because it's through your you have to go through a test. So you have like a drawing test and you have a written test. And you're sat in this massive room. It's a bit like A levels, and you're like 200 drawing away, and they maybe take about 50 in each school. Um, and then they have a couple of days of these tests where and actually I remember the test was on the day of my great grandmother's funeral. And I can't remember what order it was in, but I think I went to the funeral in the morning and the test was in the afternoon. And I don't want to say that like side events in my life make me more emotional or um let's say outward in my creative output. But I was very emotional that day, and I really went full on in the test. It was like sort of like a, quite healing also in a way. And then there's a text. So you have to respond to a text in the test, and it was a text by George Perec on species of spaces. Espèce d'espace. I'm gonna say it in French because I read it in French, so it's quite hard to like. I'm like, do I have the right translation in English? But and then I carried that book with me also for ages. Like the book became a companion. So I think it was like a really like transformative moment. And from the moment I got in the school, I think that sort of, because you already go through a first massive hurdle where it's quite a selective process and it's what you output on the spot on that day, which counts. And so I think that sort of maybe reassured them a little bit. And then after that I went on to study design and then moved to London where I did a master degree at London College of Printing, now called London College of Communication. part of University of the Arts. And I never had a specific plan, like I'm going to stay in London or I'm going to move back to France or like go to the US or whatever. Things just happened like that. And I think, and I when I found my first job, it was in the UK. I was searching in France and in the UK for a job. And and from that moment, I think they were reassured. So it wasn't like, but yeah, there was no one in the family doing um art or design. And I guess the closest, again, because you dig into your past and sort of try to draw parallels or connections with things. But my grandfather, as a hobby, was doing bookbinding. And it's not something I, particularly looked into until he actually passed away. And he had this massive toolbox with a lot of um, bookbinding tools. And and so the family was like, would you like to have this? And I started using some of the tools a lot, especially like some of the bending tools, which are really convenient if you want to make like little mock-ups and dummies.
Uh-huh.
And and he also did like quite a few bookbinding pieces using the technique of marquetry. And if I tried to connect the dots, I'm sure this had an influence. And then he also had this book of patterns for end papers, which were all patterns by William Morris. And I think it's like little subliminal things that connect you back, because then that connected me also to the UK. And and then I found out a lot more about William Morris and like amazing values he had. And so I feel like there's nothing direct, but it's still
Yeah.
elements.
It's really interesting to me, and I hear it termed many different things. Some people refer it to the universe, or I heard one friend call it invisible hands. The kind of
But that's
feeling,
nice.
the feeling that you're being helped along when you're on the right path, or you encounter something that's good. And I've had that over the last 2 years in writing this book. I've had this wonderful, at times, kind of mind-bending serendipity. Like just people coming into my life by complete chance and circumstance, who will then open another door, and then this person does that, and it's just been this constant flow of that. And I think that's amazing, the kind of transgenerational link. I really think there's something there too, and I think that's beautiful. It's a lovely story on both counts, on the test and also the bookbinding. I think that's wonderful.
Thank you.
I don't always have the words for it, but when you feel it, that's all you need to know, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think also it makes it a bit more emotional, and that's how you start owning a little bit more to your journey. And maybe like what you were saying, the some of the shadow sides where you're trying to
Mhm.
search for these things or trying to be more confident about, various things, or fight your imposter syndrome or
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes people look at all that stuff and think it's all, whatever, the bollocks. And but no, I think if you lend yourself to it and observe it, it's all real. And like I never met my grandfather on my dad's side. He drank quite a bit and he died quite young before I was born. But this, even just, I've never even seen a picture because they were quite a poor family and they never had cameras back in the whenever it was 60s, I think. Um, but the stories, he was quite a character, like he spent a lot of his days in the pub, but was full of anecdotes and stories and wisecracks. And that's certainly a part of me and comes across in my storytelling, in my work. And, I've never met the guy, but it's whether it's passed down through my dad, whether it's just something genetic, I don't know. And really, I don't care because it's wonderful, whatever it is.
yeah. Yeah, I think and I love the idea of the invisible hands. I find that really beautiful. But I really believe also in those universe signs, or even, like how we met in Barcelona. Because just for context, we met at off in Barcelona, even though we knew of each other online before. Um, and I think those connections are really also super meaningful in those moments where, we sort of put ourselves out there, but
Mhm.
then you meet incredible people in those moments. And I think it does create like long-lasting connections. And I believe that also is quite a bit of a sign of the universe.
I think so, as a highly sensitive person myself, I'm well aware that our industry is full of sensitive people because that's what makes us observant and good at our jobs and caring enough to persevere and do this.
Yeah.
Um, And I know that that can also be challenging, particularly to introverted people in terms of going to big events where there's lots of people. But I always encourage it because we are social creatures. And I think that there is something beautiful about that coming together of,
Yeah,
with shared passions, whether it's in education, whether it's in industry or just leisure. Whenever I push myself to do that, it always pays off in some way, you know?
yeah, yeah, I agree.
Even if it's just a great conversation, but yeah, in terms of
Yeah,
these kind of link ups, there's just something very lasting and very
yeah,
permanent about that in person thing.
yeah, I agree. Yeah,
It's funny because when you said that, you said about, because obviously you got up on stage, you gave this amazing talk, but I remember seeing you on the way there, and you gave me one of your prints, and you were quite nervous, and actually, you weren't the only one. I met like Graham McGowan; he was a nervous wreck beforehand, and so many people who gave these incredible talks. And I guess that speaks to the need to push ourselves towards discomfort. And I know that's another cliche, but it is very real too.
yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, I was thinking, so I never do resolutions, and this year, exceptionally, I was like, I have these ideas, so they are a form of resolution, and I've been putting off a lot of stuff, so I was like, it's the time to do it. And one of them was get out of my comfort zone more,
Mm,
and on the other hand, also stay in my comfort zone more,
yeah.
like, and I feel like I need to do both because I'm pushing myself a lot out of my comfort zone, but I also need to stay a bit more in it to be
Mhm.
like, to relax as well, mainly and rest. But I felt that was like an interesting, duality of like the two. But I do feel like, especially with, well, I guess you have the same, but with our really independent practices, like for me, those social moments are crucial. Um, because it's a moment where you share, where you reflect, where you definitely like learn new skills. Where after the talk, like I'm processing a lot of stuff where I'm like, I need to do this, I want to do this, I want to add this to my journey, to my discourse, I want to change that. Like it's really like helpful and constructive, I find. Like I'm quite a big believer in like being quite self-critical. But yeah, I get really nervous before, and it never seems to get easier. But I always, like you say, I always think it's really invaluable to do, and for me again, like all the people I've met there, it's been like really important and really, and like some people, become friends, some people become angel guardians. Um, there's a lot of different relationships that are born from those moments, and it's really, I think it's so important when you're not in a big office and you don't have loads of colleagues, and because you kind of become my colleagues, and I really value that, and I really need that. Like I also recognize that I need that, and that I'm not like a sort of, some people work solo and they like to stay solo a lot, and that's not necessarily for me. I'm sort of introverted, still social beast.
I'm the same. I'm really sensitive, but I'm not introverted. I'm a people person,
Yeah,
but I also, like you said, it's always, this is what I find more and more. It's always the yin and the yang. And I think that
yeah,
sometimes we tend to go, right, now it's going to be this, and it's going to, like you said, discomfort. But if you only do that quite quickly, it's like, no, no, you have to have the balance always. And I'm on some days I'm at my most happy when I'm sat at my desk. I've got some like nerdy video game music on, and I'm just in my own world. Other days, I feel really lonely in my studio, and and then I'm messaging going, "Is anyone around for a pint later?" Or like, and
I
it's
do
just,
the same exactly. Sometimes I'm like dancing in the studio. I'm like, oh my God, this is so great. Like no one on the phone bothering me, like thinking because I also worked for 10 years in open spaces. So
yeah,
that's like you savor those moments alone. But then you're like, the next day you're like, are you free for lunch? Are you free for a drink after work? Do you want to come to the talk with me? Do you want to
it's
come to this opening?
yeah, it's so true, and I think it's really important to all within kind of the creative practice. It's really important to always remain like pay attention and always be attuned to even day to day what the needs are, because the perfect work environment on one day will be the opposite the next. It's
Yeah.
like I've done some of my best work on like the megabus with a scanner on the seat next to me, and other
That's
times
amazing.
yeah, I'm like with like my now wife Laura. I was dating her when she was in London and I was in Manchester, and I wasn't particularly well off, so I had to get the megabus down. And editorial clients, tight deadlines, it would be like I'd have to be making do. And sometimes just one seat, if somebody was sat next to me, I had like my scanner and MacBook piled up on my knee, and they're kind of looking at it, thinking, "What's this guy doing?"
That's
Uh,
amazing.
yeah.
I mean,
And sometimes that works. Like I love the hustle of, like cafe spaces and open shared studios, but the next day I might just want the quiet and the music and everything else. So I think it's like to get optimum creativity, I think it's good to be sympathetic to that within the parameters
yeah,
like deadlines and everything else.
I agree.
Yeah. So in terms of your professional steps then, so coming out of education, I know you worked, was it Barbican first?
Yeah, Barbican. Well, there were a few like other experiences before which I've like sort of taken out of the narrative.
Yeah.
But which actually really helped as well. But like I worked in a branch of Unilever for a bit before the Barbican. And it helped me get more professional work into the portfolio because my portfolio coming out of uni was super experimental and it had no graphic design. You'd think there would be coming out of a typography studies design course, but I also always had that side where an artist was just like, and the MA really enabled me to experiment as long as it was a response to the brief. It didn't have to be in a specific field. So I did like photography, installation, and then I was applying to graphic design jobs, and they were like, "What is this?" you know and they were like, I had one book on the body, for example, which like quite sexy pictures, to be honest. And it's like a massive like A3 plus size book, hand bound with like a really lush red leather cover. And I just turned up in interviews with this book, and they were like wanting me to design like flyers and newsletters. And they're like uh I'm showing like really like beautiful body parts.
Yeah.
and and so it was, I think also it's interesting because I think now it's very different because there's so much more tools as well, and people don't really come out with such a disjointed portfolio in terms of the field they study in.
Yeah.
um and and so I had to go through a couple of experiences before to reshape my portfolio to kind of look, I can design an A4 newsletter and I can design an A5 flyer. Oh, and I can make a logo or something. Uh, so I wasn't your typical like, oh my gosh, she's an amazing graphic designer. Like, let's get her off in
Yeah.
that one of those lush design studios in London. And yeah, I was an outsider in some ways. And then with the Barbican, yeah, that was the first like long-term job that I went into.
I love those stories. I remember same thing. Like I did. I always said my first commission was for When Saturday Comes, football magazine, which it kind of was. That was my first like published in the mainstream type of project. However, sooner than that, and I worked as a recycling officer at Preston City Council after university, a temping job. And how I got that job was I was sending out a very speculative early portfolio, which makes me think of what you just said. It was full of these weird acrylic like collages and things, and it's so funny looking back. But off somehow from that, and I'm talking about like anatomical Frankenstein, like H.R. Geiger tackle. I got commissioned to do the recycling calendar with like green bin, black bin.
That's so cool.
And it I mean, when I think back to that thing, it's a wonder that the council signed off on it, but they did, and they paid me well. And they were
That's
like,
amazing.
something. They were like something to get the students recycling, basically. So they went, yeah, that's weird. That's weird enough. That's fine. And then the first one I got, it was 80 quid to do this front cover of like a not-for-profit nursing magazine. And this time it was a design studio, and they looked at it and
I love that.
they said, yeah, this weird stuff's perfect. Like, do that, but nursing. And I was like, all right, okay, cool. So I had this like nurse with just a mouth for a head and these coins falling out of the sky and like an arm grabbing them. It was so weird. And I remember delivering it. And then about 2 days later, they got back and went, yeah, the client hates it and they've gone a different direction. And I sort of thought, I'm not surprised. Like, did nobody pick up on this and kind of temper it? Like, it was really, for me, it was bad art direction. Okay, I played my part, but there you go. But it's amazing what lessons you learn from these very
Yeah,
weird
it's so funny.
portfolios that you emerge
It's
with.
it's also funny because when you make me think with the nursing home story, I had one like internship during my studies in France, where so I found an internship in a really random place, but the sort of person who was mentoring me there ended up becoming a friend, and we had a really fun time. Like we ended up partying a lot and doing really weird designs. But most of what I had to do in the internship were backgrounds for these medical blouses for like nurses and doctors. And you think like, it's like really like actually when you think back at those really niche, weird experiences, and like at the beginning I was always like, oh my God, like why didn't I do an internship in this like really cool, like all the design studios you grew up knowing about in Design Week and like
Yeah.
create a review and then but instead you went to like a really unknown, obscure place, that the name even was weird, and you're like doing watercolor backgrounds scanning them in for these like medical outfits, and it's like super weird but also super fun to remember those.
Absolutely, they've certainly got value. If just the stories,
Yeah.
Oh God. So how did you get into the Barbican?
Oh, actually that wasn't like a none of it was smooth.
The best
um
the best stuff's never smooth.
so again, like I'm quite stubborn, like I said earlier, and when I become like when I have an idea in mind, I'm like I want to go and work there. Like I will literally start stalking the vacancy page, the job section of the website, like to see if there's anything relevant. So I literally go every 2 days on the website to see if there was anything relevant. First time around, there was a paid internship, and I was like, great. And so I did like a little personalized CD. I put my portfolio on the CD. I guess the CD gives away like the sort of time we were still in. Like, I don't know if we should explain what a CD is to people now, but like listening to this. But let's say it's the equivalent of what you call a hard drive or a USB stick now. I think even USB sticks are obsolete. Like I actually turned up to a talk recently. I was like, I have my USB stick.
Brilliant. I've done that. Yeah, I've still got one.
And anyways, I sent this like little CD with a personalized cover. Anyway, I never got a response. And no wonder. I mean, the work was quite like bad. But then um I kept stalking the vacancy page of the website, and I saw 3 months later that they were advertising for a junior position. And I mean, in a way, what are the odds to get a junior design position when you've not even got a response for the internship? And I don't know what went through my mind, but I just thought I can't send the same CD again with the same like cheesy cover and stuff. So, and obviously they were looking for a junior designer to work in-house with their team and work with the marketing team. And what I did is I went to the gallery, and I picked up their leaflets. And at the time, I think they had a really cool exhibition on a British graphic design. It's when the Barbican still exhibited graphic design as some kind of high art.
Yeah.
And it's been a while. They haven't had any of those. If they listen to this, hint, hint. But anyway, there was this. They would print these leaflets with a very particular visual identity, and they would be on tinted paper stock. And so I just picked one of those up, and then I designed my whole portfolio and CV using that sort of grid and template. Basically, literally just showing that I could understand the visual identity. And then I used the same paper stock and I printed it and sent it. So again, it tells you a bit about the fact that we're still sending paper applications.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really
And
good. I mean, that's great. And then again, that's respect for the client. It's consideration. It's a detail. They're ticking a lot of boxes there in the right way.
and so literally that got me the job. Then I still had an interview and I had to do a test. They were getting everyone to do a sort of very informal test, mainly to check that we could switch on the computer and use in design. Because that does happen, that you get people who show a great portfolio and then they can't use any of the software, and then when you question them they're like, oh, well, I did this with a couple of people actually.
Yeah.
um but anyway, so I was fine also with the test process, because I know that's something that's questioned a lot as well in sort of recruitment process in our field. But I got the job literally. I don't not from my portfolio because I couldn't transform my portfolio drastically in the space of 3 months, but
Mm.
from that approach to my application, just showing as an in-house designer that I would be able to adapt material. And they said something like they had received 500 applications. And in some ways, when I look back, I think it's crazy no one else thought about it. I mean, it's good for me because if we had been 500 doing the same thing, that
Of
wouldn't
course.
have worked out so well. Um, and that really kicked off my sort of entry point into working as a designer in the arts. And I think one of the things why I was so specific about the Barbican was that I really liked that they had all art forms under one roof. And that for me, with my sort of art practice in parallel to my design practice, working in an art space or a museum or an institution felt like the most logical place to keep learning and nurturing my passion for the arts, and also witnessing practices in that field while doing a job
Mm.
where I was making a living.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. And I hadn't thought about that. But yeah, being immersed in all that, all those things that you might never otherwise have encountered.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge.
So for example, also like, I mean, one of the things that was also really amazing for like a young, graduate in London is obviously in that field the salaries aren't very high, but you have incredible access to everything. So you can go to concerts, you have access to all London museums and galleries with your staff pass. You have, I could go after work and watch a film or go to a gig. So, I discovered also like music that I had never heard of, or musicians, pianists, classical music that I wouldn't have gone to otherwise, or world music, or like really amazing stuff. And I really, really like immersed, like completely, like you say, immersed myself for like nearly 3 years while I was there by discovering a lot of and going, to these exhibitions, and you're literally like a floor down from the gallery and two floors away from the cinema, so you just kind of pop in and be like, "Do you have a spare seat for this?" And
Yeah, what an incredible workplace. And also just makes me yearn for much more of a return to old school art school in education, as opposed to kind of segregated disciplines, And don't get me wrong, I understand the need to have graphic design and the rest of it, but surely a greater cross-pollination and almost mandatory collaboration would make more sense.
I agree with that. And that's really what I'm also like trying to get students that I meet or teach to do more of, is to collaborate. Like for example, I was teaching on a course for a year in East London, and they had, next to the design course, they had a jewelry course and they had a furniture course, a furniture design course. And I was like, guys, collaborate. This is the most amazing moment of your life to do this because you have the machinery, you have the facilities, and you have access to each other,
Yeah.
which you lose after.
Yeah. And only hindsight kind of tells you that. I felt the same way, and I now preach that to any other students that I encounter. I say, go and, go and even just get the connections for the other designers and the other
Yeah.
departments, because that network, you will look after each other when you've all got no money and you need each other.
Yeah. And it's funny because now it's what I want to do the most of, and I'm almost like, oh, I want to go back studying.
Yeah.
But that's, when I think about the Bauhaus, like I really think that it was such a great model because they had this cross-pollination and they had like architecture students mixing with like, and doing design and textile and doing costumes, and that's where also I really want to take my practice. Like at the moment, I'm like, so like last year I collaborated with a shaper, so it's someone who makes like surfboards, and and it's just like the funnest things to collaborate on, and you have no idea how complex it is to paint until you're confronted with this very light piece of foam, which then
Yeah.
becomes quite heavy. And and I felt actually like a student again because I was like, painting like so bad. I was like so embarrassed because I was like confronted to something I've never worked on. And those moments I'm like, this is what it's all about and what makes me excited, not to do the like the same kind of jobs over and over again.
Yeah, and that's an individual consideration, isn't it? Because I'm the same. I really need variation. I realized that quite early on in my career, and when I started to roam beyond illustration, and I started like a music project in Manchester with a music writer and collaborated. And it tends to come back to visual communication in some way, but within
Mhm.
that space, I love to test myself and try new things and keep evolving because I know that I've got a mind that will get lethargic if I don't keep myself hungry. And
Yeah.
and it's that same thing. I've always found real magic in that collaborative environment of art school, and so the picture you've just painted there of the Barbican is just beautiful. you know do you think that had an influence on your current practice and the variation within it?
Um, yeah, I think it's had an influence mainly culturally because so after the Barbican, I went to the ICA, Institute of Contemporary Arts in London, where I stayed for 5 years. And because the scale was much smaller than the Barbican, um, you're even closer. So you meet even more the artists. You're sitting next to the curators, the marketing team. You're all together really in this space. And even like people building the exhibition, furniture or space or like because everyone's in house basically. And and that I think both of those experiences, and including the third one, which was Phaidon, but have had a massive influence on me sort of keeping on learning about culture, art, design, architecture, food. Like Phaidon was massive for me to learn more about food.
Mm.
And it's transformational. And I think the way you cook also when you're making art is really important because it's really like there's gesture, there's color, there's inspiration, there's nourishment, fulfillment. And I think it's like you say, all these things are like, these invisible hands or visible ones, but that feed us in ways that are, I think, super virtuous and like rounded.
Yeah, and it's about having the courage to keep following those indicators, isn't it? As well, I
Yeah.
like I said, I got this thing with the book, the serendipity that happened there, but all the while that's happening, and then there's the voice going, you need to be earning, with your illustration, you should be marketing to clients and all that stuff. And yes, in a logical sense, I should have, definitely. My bank account says that I should have, but but it's too magic to me not to, and I have to follow that because
Yeah.
that's why I do this. It's why I wanted to go to art college and everything else. And long term, I think it will pay off. I will be more sustainable in my practice. I will be happier,
Yeah.
and therefore I will attract the right projects. And you have to sort of practice believing that mindset, don't
Yes. Yeah.
you?
I totally agree. And I had a bit of a moment when I was telling you earlier about this, like, reflection on like the passing of year from 2023 to 2024. And it's like this passage. And it's been like, I have been questioning a lot, like, why have I been doing this? And like, I've released 2 books last year. And obviously, like, exactly what you're saying, it's like the bank account tells a different story to the output, but I just have this thing where I'm like, I need to do it and I want to do it. And it's again like when I left my full-time job and I was just like, I knew I had to do it. And it's like, and I was, like using all my spare time to go screen printing. And there's a moment where you just want to go more and not be like conditioned in a certain way, or whether it's your time or whether it's the space or the people, and you just want to be able to do it. And so I've always listened, and sometimes I do wonder if I was right. And because again, it's like good to question our decisions, but with the book, like, I mean, I think the book form is one of the most exciting and noble forms, and I never thought I would make books. And then it's just again some like a natural thing that's happened. And obviously, I started making more books at the ICA, and I designed some of their books. And then we did a couple of sort of DIY publishing there with some of the curators. And I did a first flip book, which we printed on a print on demand platform with one curator and just did 10 copies. And so I felt that in a smaller sort of organization, there was a space to experiment with the book form. But yeah, I'm really excited by books, and I keep thinking I have to stop making books because I'm not making a living from them. But then I think there's something so wonderful also and emotive about the books. And like I've been making these wordless books, and So like I really also admire that you've been making this book because it's like it's such an investment in time, and it's also like there's something really generous about it, but there's also something really consuming
Mhm.
because there's a lot of questioning, like, and you know, for example, like on the model that you've done where you're doing a Kickstarter, it's but still you're not paying yourself and you're like you're just funding the production. And
Yeah.
so there's all these moments where you're wondering like, should I really be doing this? And how am I being supported? Or how can I support even the book? Like how can I distribute it? How can it have a life? You know, like not just sit in the boxes. And so I keep questioning those things. Um, but it's making sense in some ways.
Yeah.
And like you say, it never makes sense straight away. I think it makes sense further down the line, and it sort of comes together. And one of the books that I did last year called Rainbow, which I still haven't managed to launch in the UK and it's not sold yet in the UK, but it was published in Korea, in Seoul. And basically from that book, which I actually made during lockdown, and then it just took a while to get out there. And I really wanted a publisher because again, it's like all these things that I like a lot of stuff I was thinking I want the support from a publisher and I want like to be that it goes to other places because I had been doing a bit of self-publishing before. And I never know if it's the right decision or not, but I'm happy with, you know, all like how it went. And then a whole series of artworks were born from this book. And so I've been like doing this mammoth 48 um color pencil drawings. And just that emerging from the book form, I think has been a real trigger for me and like finding also more comfort in my artistic practice.
Mhm.
And sort of I'm really excited to show it.
It won't always be the right decision either. And I think
Yeah,
we have to find peace with that, and that it's still necessary to go through that process to get to what's next and to learn. So
yeah.
again, that becomes it's a confident I think it's a confidence mindset. You know, like I had Kimberly Wilson on the podcast recently, who is a psychologist, and she's got this brilliant book out about processed food and about she terms it whole body mental health, and it's about looking after ourselves as one organism and not treating the mind and the body as separate. Really interesting stuff. And she gave me the best description I've heard of confidence, which was the brain's ability to predict a positive outcome. And you know,
That's nice.
people think of confidence as this innate bravado that some people have and some people don't. It's not true. It's a practice and a momentum thing. So of
Mhm.
course, you know, like I had 6 quiet months in a row last year, and it was quite testing. And I got back to that early mindset in my career of, oh my God, am I ever going to get another commission again? And I couldn't feel how that was possible. And then something came in, and suddenly you're moving again, and that's what confidence is. It's so that's why you just have to work through sometimes
Yeah,
and keep the faith and draw confidence from previous successes too. You know.
yeah. You know, and I think with the quote you just mentioned, I think there's definitely something also that's linked to optimism. And and I think one thing that keeps me going is that I mean, I have to say, like the last years were testing, but I think, an optimistic mindset by nature. So I kind of, you know, I try to believe it's harder with the, you know, world events, but I try to believe in sort of, you know, human nature and like the good side will win. I'm not sure if our politicians believe the same thing, but it's you know, I think yeah, there's definitely an optimistic side, which is why we keep doing what we do and why also we take these risks sometimes because I think we're quite optimistic and we believe as well.
Yeah, I agree. My baseline is quite optimistic, and the same as you. It's been testing the last few years. You know, I became a twin parent, so my defenses are down because I'm tired more than I ever was, and so I've been
I
quite
can imagine.
vulnerable. But what I found really good was Steph. Did you listen to the episode with Stefan Sagmeister?
No, not yet. Yeah,
Well,
it's on my
it's about his latest book. Now is better, and it's incredible. It was a real lift actually. It's about long term thinking and looking back at the whole of human history instead of just the headlines that we're exposed to now in 24-hour news cycles. You know, so he was looking at things like the amount of democratic countries, which used to be one, America, and is now something like the early 80s. And, so he's looking at this longer term approach and kind of get some
Amazing.
perspective. And it's really, but the visual, I think you'll love it actually with your practice. It's a physical process he's used. He's bought all these original classical paintings and then he's cut into them with these graphic one color shapes and done it all by hand. And they're the images in the book. And the colored shapes represent the kind of statistics. And it's amazing. It looks at, famine and things like that. And it goes through a lot of things. And he acknowledges, yes, we have some monsters now, like climate crisis and different things. However, when you take a step back and get away from the internet a little bit, it's not a bad time to be alive. It's kind of when compared. Anyway, it's really interesting. And he talks about being a kind of baseline optimist as well. So, there is a thread there, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm interviewing Stefan at Off Festival this year.
Oh yeah.
And on the Friday, it's kind of a part two almost. It's again about long-term thinking.
Right.
But I'm kind of excited, but also daunted about
that. I'm sure you'll be great. You're really good with questions. But actually also there's a book I picked up from Rough Trade last year. And the title is called Pessimism is for Lightweights. And it really helped me at the end of last year, like just looking at the book cover and just having it at home and just like it's almost become like a mantelpiece where I'm like when I look at it and I'm like, yeah, we can do this, like we can get through these times, or it's really.
Yeah. And I don't know who said it or who the author is, but this takes me back to my conversation with Craig Oldham, who is creative director at Rough Trade.
Yes.
And he said it was in our conversation. Craig was talking about activism, which I'd like to talk to you about in a moment. But he was talking about pessimism being for lightweights and, how we have to care and we have to try to make a difference. It's kind of, not part of the job because everyone's different. But I think that, we have a powerful skill here with visual communication. Yeah. So speaking of books, then I got a copy of your book, The Global Warming Anyone.
Oh yeah.
At Off Festival. It's wonderful, and a number of your projects could be termed perhaps as activism. Would that be fair?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. What part of you does that come from? Is that the optimism? Is that kind of a response to injustice? What?
I think it's a mix of things, but I think a lot of the time when I make it, it comes from an impulse. But the impulse isn't. Although the impulse is something in an instant moment, it comes from like, something that's been brewing and seeping in me for a while. So for example, the fragile UK flag, which is, a piece actually that I did not long after I left my full-time job, and it's a weird year because it was 2015. I did a lot of my most sort of symbolic pieces that year, and I think that's probably an interesting transition as well from going from a full-time job to an independent practice, and in that first year doing a lot of personal non-commissioned project alongside commissions. But and so for example, to take the example of the UK fragile flag, which for people listening in who haven't seen it, is the Union Jack revisited on royal blue paper with fragile tape, drawing the Union Jack. And actually I made it before Brexit happened. A lot of people think it's only linked to Brexit, but it's not. But it's really linked to a sense of identity, of a place I call home, which is the UK, and which has shifted in the years, and the way I've known it has shifted in the last years. And when I made it, I was teaching A-level students at in an art A-level curriculum class, and in Clapham South, and a lot of them were 16, working after school, sort of saving up to go to university, and the university fees tripled in that year. So they were saving up. I think it was at the time it was £1,000 to study for 1 year in the UK, plus all the surrounding expenses, and it went to £3,000. And so from one day to the other, they saw their hope of going to university completely crushed and annihilated. And so to witness that for me, like, and people who were dedicating so much time at such a young age as well to develop their future and invest in their future, I thought was really, really tricky to, to witness, and I felt quite cruel as well, thing for them to experience. And at the same time, there were obviously talks about defunding the NHS, like the slow motion defunding of the NHS, and then looming talks of Brexit, which includes loss of freedom of movement and so on and so forth. And so for me, I was like, I made that flag, and with all those things brewing in me and thinking three foundational, important things, like health, education, and freedom in general are at stake and are just gonna like whiz through our eyes and disappear. And with little fights, in some ways when you think about it. And people also were conned, and so I really felt emotional in that time, and I made the flag then. So sometimes these artworks, like I made it in an impulse on that day, but it's sentiments that had been in me for a while. And the global warming one happened a little bit differently, because this one happened in the context of an exhibition. I was invited to exhibit in an exhibition called Man-Made Disaster: How Patriarchy is Ruining the Planet. And it just happened that I came across a tweet by the 45th president of the US. And I thought, oh, this is my material. And then I found out that there were a lot more. And I teamed up actually with a journalist who's English, and he's called Tommy Walters, and he's now actually based in the US. I think he's working for CNN. No. Oh, well, maybe delete that part. But anyway, he's working as a journalist in the US. And he basically wrote the introduction as well, and I thought it was really nice to have someone that is not necessarily in the art world or the design world write and contextualize the work. And then the book compiles over 120 tweets by the 45th president of the US. And again, with that book, it was an interesting story because I printed 5 copies actually. And then it got into the hands of someone at the European Parliament in Brussels, a Green MP, and they ordered 20. And I thought, okay, I want to print it, like I want to do a proper edition. And then I started looking at the figures and the numbers and how do I self-publish this? And I asked them to pre-order. So they paid up front, which was amazing because it helped me with the printings, and they pre-ordered 20 copies, and I sold them directly. So there's no bookshop or in between person taking 50%. And then I also thought it's an opportunity to do an expanded edition, because in the meantime, the 45th president of the US had tweeted some more. So I did a new expanded edition. And I printed as many copies as there were of tweets. So I think it was around 125 or something like that. And I did 125 books, and so it was also a really interesting little journey to see that something like that then had appeal as a tool to politicians. And I never ever planned my work to go in that direction, and I sometimes also steer away from doing work like that because it is I find it quite demanding and heavy and tricky, and yeah, it's emotional as well in some ways. And so I would say I come and go into this work, and it's not something I wouldn't say I'm doing it systematically. So I'm quite protective of my mental health because I realized I got quite affected as well by the weight of some of those projects. And things also that happen online where you get like trolls of all sorts. And so I'm really mindful with those things, and I have to say that generally after doing quite a political artwork, I will go into a Care Bear phase, and do a lot of things.
Care Bear phase. I love that. My equivalent would be professional wrestling phase.
I love that as well. And I'm having these images of like a Care Bear. Like we should dress up next time we do a festival, and you're like a wrestler, and I'm a Care Bear. Like, um, but and that really also helps me, that Care Bear phase, and I call it the Care Bear phase because I've been doing a lot of things. I'm laughing because I'm still like getting my head around the fact that I'm doing a lot of stuff with hearts and rainbows. It's like really unexpected as well because I never thought I would go down that road. And it's really, but I really like it also. And you know, like sometimes when you're like organizing your archive of images and I see all these colorful things and it really makes me happy. And so I feel like I should stick to that Care Bear face for a while.
Yeah, and it goes, but and you owe it to the sweet shop as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's the link with the sweet shop.
But you're right. But you're right though, and again, it's the yin and yang thing again. And but emotional is right, and this is something that I've only recently become aware of in terms of actually naming the different types of creativity. But this came up on a recent episode, and it's that we practice both intellectual creativity and emotional creativity. And intellectual might be the external client brief where we are still being creative, but we're ticking a lot of boxes. We're delivering to a very specific brief. Emotional creativity is what we have to say about the world, how we feel, and expressing ourselves, which is really
Mm,
important. And I think if you neglect emotional creativity, then you can burn out quite easily and lose
mm,
sight of why you wanted to do this in the first place. But as you said, you have to balance it because I'm the same. I've done heavy projects. I've done stuff that's quite angry or very responsive because again, we it's a symptom of that optimism that you mentioned is that we want to see justice. And I think we are quite
mm,
sensitive people and we want to see the world, a better world. So when we see things, and I remember that same time that you mentioned, it felt horrible because of this succession of things like Brexit and like the healthcare and this government just gradually chipping away at things that we perhaps took for granted. But then when they're being taken away, you suddenly realize how fundamental they are. Um, Tough time, really tough. The last decade has been a gradual kind of, intensification of that, really.
mm.
So you do have to balance that with the Care Bear phase, yeah. So in terms of the direction of your practice, how much control do you like A want to have over that and B have in terms of where you're going next and how you're paying the bills and you know how does it how you don't bite off more than you can chew or have too little
Mm.
work?
It's another really good question. Um, so I've obviously been taking a risk in the last um, couple of years because I've been taking a little bit less design commissions in order to develop my art practice, which is again, like we were saying earlier, it's like when we're making the books or other things, it's like a call, and I think I've been pushing that call away for a long time. And I think that's what I always destined myself to. And I think my journey in design has been really important and is still really important and it's still there, which is why I'm also being a bit more cautious in how I talk about it or how I, even for myself, but I feel like at the moment they're both coexisting side by side. I would just say that it's maybe a 50-50 aspect. So it's almost like taking a general pay cut um, to be able to clear time to make new things, learn new things. So, for example, last year I went on a lot of like residencies, and I did like a wood workshop where I was like doing a collective totem with 12 other people, or I went on a natural dyeing course. Or another one was building a solar oven with a really interesting French designer called Nathalie Cassé. Um, and and those experiences have been amazing. But when you're doing those things, and sometimes it's 2 weeks or a week, or you really can't do any other work because it's quite physical, um, and and it's long hours because it's really like quite intense programs, and and then also there's a social aspect at the end of the day where you're 12 and you live all in the same place, and you're working together and then dining together, and so you don't want to like sort of go away to your room and do computer work. And so I've been like quite clear at trying to save those moments really to learn and develop. And I feel they're really important in terms of developing my art practice. But on the side, I still have to design work, which is, you know, my sort of my way of making a living. And I think also it helps me not putting that pressure on the art side at the moment, because it gives more freedom with my art practice. Like I don't have to rein it in at the moment in a specific commercial outlet or a gallery, or
Yeah.
you know, like you meet galleries that would tell you, oh, this work would sell better, or if you make it this way. And at the moment, I rely my income is still really based on the design work. And you know, I do sell some screen prints in galleries, and some of the artist books I really don't make anything on. And I'm teaching as well, and you know, I'm looking, so I'm doing a lot of like it's a bit of a juggling act. I'm doing a lot of different things, and one thing that I would like to try to do is do slightly. I never thought I would say this. Maybe I'll regret. But anyway, anything I say is of today and in this moment, and I might change my mind tomorrow. I might not be a Care Bear tomorrow. But basically, you know, I really would like to have a couple more, like slightly more corporate jobs than the ones I have on at the moment, because I think it would help the balance more in
Mhm.
terms of what I do. So that's something I'm looking into also in 2024, is how do you find these kind of jobs? How much time do they take? Is it more clear cut, like you spend 2 months on that job and then you can do 2 months um of the other work? And the other work is really a gamble, because I have no idea where it's going to go. I have no idea if it's going to work out, and it's definitely I'm definitely taking a risk, because I'm showing also less of the commercial work that I'm doing, the graphic design commissions I'm showing less of, and as these things happen, the less you show, the less commissions you start getting.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so yeah, it is a gamble, and but it's something again I really want to try, and I feel so at home in this moment with um what I'm trying on the artistic side. And I feel like, you know, each time I go to talk about arts and stuff, I'm like, I have this like, I'm like, I'm where I'm supposed to be. And it's a real like eureka moment. It's really emotional as well. So you know, it's worth trying. And I think also it's okay if it doesn't work out, you know, it's
So,
like,
of course, you can always take a little backward step. You can always find something
mm,
else. And I constantly say this to particularly young designers, that there's nothing wrong with getting a job. Get a part-time job, get a full-time job. If that, you know, if that's what you need to do to free up
mm,
your emotional creativity and build with purity, do it,
mm,
because it's no kind of failure. And as we said earlier about the kind of earliest experiences, you get so many other experiences that inform your creativity,
yeah,
you know, which is invaluable. Um, but I would say again, looking at what whether you even see it yourself, I don't know, because you're very close to it. But the Sarah Boris brand to me is so strong now across all your disciplines, even like the bench, the Love Heart bench. From that, you know, the difference in medium between that and let's say your I Love EU posters,
uh,
um, are very different. But to me, they're very Sarah Boris. All of it you've built. There's enough currency and identity within all of your practice and your brand that it works. So absolutely go for it would be my advice, because there seems to be a bit of a wave at the moment. You know, the talks you're giving, the way you're out there, it's very inspiring to me, and I think that you're on the right track.
thank you. That's giving me hope and optimism. It's a good way to start the year.
Yeah, and I never kiss asses either. It's, you know, it's just my that's the way I interpret it. But it's yeah, it's great. It's great to see, and it makes me want to do more of it too, which is why I'm pushing forward with this whole creative condition thing, because it's where my heart is, and I love my illustration like I always did. But like you said, I need that variation. I need the days where I get a lovely illustration commission. But then off the back of that, it's important for me to go and have these kind of conversations and go out there and do a talk and help people understand creativity. That's become my driving force, in not just in my work, but in my life. So,
That's
you know,
amazing.
it's again the yin and yang, but to have both things is really good.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd want to exclusively do either.
Yeah, and I think they really nurture each other. And that's what I was actually, it's interesting because someone said to me recently, oh, well, so it's a project I didn't get. I was like in the finalists after like going through a long application process, and it was something that's really at the crossroads of my art practice and design practice. So I thought it's perfect. And there was a final interview between the institutions and me, and what was interesting is, so I didn't get it, and then they offered me to go for a coffee, and you know, because they were interested to keep in touch anyway, which was amazing. And they said something like, "Oh, well, we were a bit confused between your art and design practice and how," and I said, and I thought it was really interesting that they were confused because I thought for me there's no confusion. Like they really nurture one another. They sometimes overlap. They sometimes flirt with each other. They sometimes collaborate. They sometimes, you know, like I use some of my design skills to make some of the artworks and vice versa. And the two cultures are totally intertwined. And it wasn't a question with, you know, when I look at some artists like you know, like even I was looking at Joseph Albers, who did furniture, who did typography, who did painting, and I'm really inspired by those practices, and I'm like, it's not confusing. So I'm really also like more trying to be more confident about having both sit side by side. And I also say, well, you have some artists who have a part-time job working for another artist, or even some artists who are, you know, a barista, or who um, have a completely different outlet, or who are working in IT, you know, and it's like completely fine. So why is it being an artist and a designer confusing? And I find that interesting that we're in a time where people find it confusing, but it's some people find it fine, and others are like, yeah, confused. So
Yeah,
that,
it's absolutely true. Come to think of it, you absolutely must listen. It's going back now. I'll send you a link, but there's an episode I did with Kerry Lemon. I don't know if you know her work, but she's so inspiring, and her approach is just incredible. Like the range of projects reminds me of yours, actually, like the sheer difference in them. But her approach to it is amazing. She's always gone with the approach of what do I want to do next and who can pay me to do it. And you know, like
that's amazing.
she wanted to go to Japan, so she was like, right, okay, what can I do in Japan? And she ended up reaching out to some university who commissioned her to do a mural in Tokyo, and it's like
That's amazing.
every
You know, it's
project
so funny.
is that, but each next one, I'm like, God, it's so different to the last, and she's just a real dynamo. I'll send you a link to the episode because
Oh, cool.
it's funny as well. She's really funny, but it's just she's got a great energy, and she's doing amazing. Like she's doing one in like the Northern Archipelago or something at the moment out in
Oh my God, wow.
it's amazing. Like it's
It's
mind
amazing.
blowing. She's one of a kind, but she's lovely and her work's really great. So yeah,
I
but
really
yeah.
want to listen to that because I really want to go to Japan.
Oh,
And
I went once and
but
I'm dying to go back there.
you know, one thing also you just said from that is really like this idea of reaching out. And I think that's really like, you know, the idea, like if you want to do something, like tell people, reach out to someone in Japan or reach out to someone in the UK, or
Hmm.
and I think a lot of people don't want to do that. And I I do it quite a bit, and I think that really helps. Like, you know, like reaching out to one another and just, you know, and even just having conversations and like find like now there's like 4 episodes I'm gonna listen to from uh from your podcast. So it's like, you know,
Yeah. Yeah, you're right though. You have to be proactive, and you do. And the thing is, if you don't, somebody will. So,
yeah,
and also, what I've always said to people is, don't put people on too big of a pedestal because, you know, it might be a dream client to you, but there's somebody in that organization that could benefit from your skills and your knowledge of that thing that you love.
yeah,
So go and tell them. You know, chances
yeah,
are you'll make their job a bit easier with your knowledge. So that's what happened to
yeah,
me with the wrestling with WWE. It was like, you know, the art director said to me, "Look, I get bombarded by new artists, but you're a nerd. You watch it every week. You know the storylines. That's really valuable to me, you know. So I don't have to tell you what's happening every time I give you a commission." So he got me on board, and I couldn't believe it.
amazing.
But I also could believe it because why would it not come to me? Because I love the product, and you know, and I've spent my life watching it. So it's kind of like, cool. All right. I'm going to tell them that I want to do it. And it might not happen, but it could,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So
I really believe in reaching out and just going like, hey, this is what
yeah,
I do.
absolutely. Yeah. The last thing I want to ask you, because I've kept you long enough and it's been brilliant. So
Nice.
thank you. But is about rest. Are you good at resting and do you give yourself mental downtime?
It's so funny because that's also part of my 2024
Yeah,
resolution.
me too.
Um, yeah, I'm trying. So I had like 2 days where I really like tried not to pick up my phone, call anyone to hang out, and just rested and just like taking time with myself, which I think is anyway a rare luxury for lots of people. I guess also like for you with two twins um and well, just twins. Um, but I am aiming to rest more and to learn to be a bit more still because I think there's value in that as well. And I'm also in a phase where I really want to learn and read a lot of things. And I found very specific things I want to learn about, which include modular art, because one of the series I've been working on is around that. And I think that is quite a restful thing to do, like reading books and sort of immersing yourself. And another thing that I find quite relaxing is going to the library and borrowing books. And I think they're like sanctuaries of like peace.
Yeah.
And so I'm going more to those as well. And like really, I think also we should just generally try to keep those places open. So just going to them symbolically even is, I think, worth it to keep them activated and
Yeah.
sort of, and it's wonderful, because I think, I mean, all of us, we have too many books and not enough space and too many archives. And so being able to, get some of those books out of the library just to study and sort of rest as well. It's something I'm really also planning to do this year. So more
Yeah.
rest, more downtime. But yeah,
I think there's
that's true.
a growing awareness of the need for it, and specifically in creativity, it's critical if you really want to get those big eureka ideas, those big moments, then you have to allow the unconscious to do its job, which is
Yeah,
as active as the conscious brain. But if the conscious brain is constantly full of TikTok or whatever the thing is that's being bombarded with, it will never deliver those great ideas. So
yeah,
that's why they happen in the shower or on a jog or whatever it might
yeah,
be. So that's, not just on that basis, but just on a pleasure basis. That's why, I'm not getting younger like anybody else. And I just want to, I don't want to spend my life grinding and constantly checking an email or whatever. That's really useful and it's really good sometimes. However, you have to find time for rest, because otherwise you can't find your optimum creativity, you know?
yeah, yeah. And I think all my ideas, like, well, let's say all my best ideas have come from downtime, like just, like walking. And when I walk, I never listen to anything either. So my brain is completely like free. You
Yeah.
just like get all these, or like even a snippet of a conversation, or, all these surrounding elements from whether they're visual or sound, or I find really important. So yeah, I think definitely like rest and time away from screens. And I think where I'm heading now is I'm spending less and less time in front of a screen. And it's been amazing. Like, and I feel, like I feel more active just even like physically as a result, because you're standing up, you're like standing something, you're painting, you're going around, you're like spray painting a surfboard, you're going to the sea, and I find those moments have brought so much to me in terms of the destination and the process, um, and just the well-being. And so I think that's the takeaway as well, like the less time in front of the screen, and when I'm in front of a screen, like being really efficient with what I'm doing on it.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, the last episode I did was with Tom Hodgkinson, who's the editor of the Idler magazine, and it's a magazine all about a more fulfilling, slower paced life. They could talk about philosophy and all these other things, and yeah, that he talks about diligent working and being hyper focused, less time, getting the most out of it, and then using the other time to be idle or get inspired or learn something. So I think you're absolutely right. Last thing, where can people find your work?
Oh, well, they can find it online. Now I'm like sending people back to the screen. So actually one of my plans is to open an online shop this year. So probably saying it publicly is gonna force me to do it because I've been saying that for the last 4 years. And I really also believe in being like more in direct contact with people who want to get the work, and having less in between. And so I have obviously on my social media, you can find me. And you can find me. I have a very sort of mini website where people can find me. But I guess we can share the links now and the
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
yeah. And they can find me in person. Like if anyone wants to meet and just have a chat, like definitely reach out because I think it's the best. And but thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank
Thank
you
you so much.
ever so much for your time. Thank you ever so much to Sarah Boris for taking the time to chat from a busy schedule. It's always an honour when people do that because I know what it's like. I'm a dad to twins, I'm an illustrator, I'm a writer, I'm a podcaster, and I have to make my living in the sum of all those parts, which is challenging at times. There's a lot of juggling and it's a fast-paced life and it doesn't leave you all that much downtime. So when someone steps out of their schedule to give me like an hour and a half of spellbinding chat, then it really means the world. So big thank you to Sarah. Thank you to everyone for listening today. It means a lot. Please do tell a friend, drop us a review and a subscription on your preferred platform. It really helps to boost the show. The Creative Condition book is coming out March 28th, 2.5 months to go. Looking at launch activities as we speak, hopefully London, Manchester, maybe Wales, off Barcelona where I'm interviewing Stefan Sagmeister live on the Friday night, April 5th. Big event. Very excited about that one. I'm going to be signing some copies of The Creative Condition as well. So look out for the off market and go and grab yourself a copy. It will be out by then, which I can't believe. I don't even have it in my hands yet. We just finished the proofreading as we speak and it's gone to typesetting and we're about to hit the presses. So it's all going on. I will update all the Kickstarter backers through the Kickstarter. You might have had a couple of messages off me already this year. So there'll be more to come as I keep you involved in the process of all that. Anything else? Yes, I've got Luke Tong and Dan Alcorn, founders of Birmingham Design Festival, coming up on a future episode. We're going to be talking about the need to socialise and have interpersonal relationships to maximise our creativity. And if anyone knows it, it's these two guys. They've run the brilliant BDF since 2018 and done it extremely well. Great guys, also graphic designers, so a lot to talk about there. Thank you so much, guys. Get in touch on all the channels. Drop me an email, hello@bentalon.com. Massive thank you to the founding supporter of the show. It's amazing, really, to have the long-term support of Illustration X, and I hope you'll go and give them a little look at their portfolios, their range of global illustrators and animators over at illustrationx.com. You can hit them up on Instagram at @WeAreIllustrationX. Have a wonderful week. Cheers for listening. Get in touch with Sarah as well. She's a joy, and as she mentioned now on the show, she's up for meetings, she's up for being in contact, so do it, especially if you're a new creative. It's so good to build these relationships and become a part of this ecosystem. It really does have a ripple effect that goes down the years. Thanks, guys. Take care. Stay creative.